Just to let you know, this episode contains themes of grief. Welcome to Filmability. My name is Joel Fisher and I'm the author of Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema, which you can find on Amazon in Kindle paperback. Welcome if this is your first time listening, and welcome back if you've listened before. Remember, you can find me wherever you get your podcasts, so don't forget to like, share, subscribe and comment and all that good stuff. This week I'll be watching Radio, the 2003 biopic of James Robert Radio Kennedy, a man with a learning disability who became closely tied to a high school American football team. Radio is directed by Michael Tollin, a director best known for sporting documentaries such as The Final Season, Hank Aaron, Chasing the Dream, and later went on to direct baseball rom-com Summer Catch with Jessica Biel and Freddie Prinze Jr. Radio's screenplay was written by Mike Rich. Mike Rich had previously written screenplays for Finding Forrester and The Rookie, and after Radio went on to write screenplays for Secretariat and Cars 3. Radio is based on an article in Sports Illustrated by Gary Smith. As usual, I would suggest you watch Radio before continuing the podcast, because I will be spoiling everything. You can find it on Netflix in the UK, or you can rent or buy it digitally and in physical form. So without further ado, let's go on with the film. Okay, so the film starts out with Inspired by a True Story, and we're in Anderson, South Carolina, 1976. As a voiceover talks about a young man, we see him pushing a shopping trolley on a railroad track. In the trolley is a radio, and this man's name is James Robert Kennedy, but for the purposes of the podcast, I shall be referring to him as Radio, and he's played by Cuba Gooding Jr. He gets in the shopping trolley, and he uses a branch to propel himself down the road, and he raises his arms, and he goes, whee! He's then pushing his shopping trolley through the town, and the car nearly hits him as the driver shouts at him to get out of the way. Then he goes to a football field where he's watching the practice. The coach tells the player to pay more attention. Radio pushes his trolley around the fence as he watches, and the coach sees him. The coach's name is Coach Jones, and is played by Ed Harris. At home, Coach Jones is going through his work when his wife comes in, and they talk a little bit about him working too hard. His wife's name is Linda, and she's played by Deborah Winger. Next day at the football field, Coach Jones is putting the players through their paces as Radio is watching them. The ball gets kicked outside and near Radio's trolley, and a player comes to see him and encourages him to throw the ball back, but Radio puts it in his trolley and keeps pushing it, as the player complains to the coach that he took their ball. Back home, Coach Jones's daughter comes in, and he tells her off for coming back in late. She says she tried to call, but the line was busy. His daughter's name is Mary Helen, and she's played by Sarah Drew. At the football field, Coach Jones and his assistant are getting out of their cars and onto the field. Coach Jones notices Radio's trolley, and he goes to confront the players. He opens a shed to find Radio bound and blindfolded. Coach Jones then cuts his ties, and Radio runs out of the shed, panicking. He trips over as he comes out, but he keeps running across the field. Coach Jones has a stern word with the team and walks away. The student who seems to be the head of the pack is Johnny, and he's played by Riley Smith. At home, Coach Jones and his family are having dinner. Mary Helen says that she knows about what happened to Radio, and Linda suggests that he does something about it. At school, the principal calls Coach Jones over, and she asks about what happened to Radio. She says that he's harmless, and she wants him to make sure that it stays that way. Then Coach Jones turns around and sees Radio pushing his trolley past the school. The principal's name is Principal Daniels, and she's played by Alfred Woodard. Coach Jones goes out to see Radio, and he holds out the football for Coach Jones to take. He apologises to Radio for what happened and suggests that they come and help them out on the field. Radio keeps pushing his shopping trolley though, but he waves back to Coach Jones as he leaves. In the field, Coach Jones's assistant is told to keep the players training hard until he stops. A montage then plays of the team constantly training as Radio watches from the fence. They keep going as it starts getting dark, and Coach Jones's assistant is called Honeycutt, and he's played by Brent Sexton. At home, Coach Jones comes in and Linda starts talking about how Mary Helen is doing at school. She complains that she's spent more time with the team than she has with their daughter, and that she'll be off to college before they realise it. At the field, Mary Helen is shown as the cheerleader, and Coach Jones is giving the team a pep talk. The team come out to cheers from the crowd as music plays and there's a montage of the game. Coach Jones sees Radio watching from behind the fence as the music fades. At a barber shop, Coach Jones is welcomed by all the men who are there. It sort of seems like this is a communal meeting place where people talk. In a small town, I suppose, there isn't a official building that they could go to. And they're all talking about how well the team are doing anyway. In the field, the team are training as Radio watches from behind the fence, and Coach Jones asks Honeycutt what he thinks Radio is doing there. Honeycutt suggests that he may be thirsty, and Coach Jones hands him a water bottle to give to Radio. The team all go for a drink as Honeycutt goes to give Radio a water bottle, putting it in his trolley. Radio takes it out and takes a sip as he watches the team. After practice, Coach Jones goes to see Radio, and Radio hands him back the water bottle. He asks for Radio's name, but he doesn't say anything, and he invites him inside. Radio leaves his shopping trolley and goes inside. In Coach Jones's office, Radio is listening to a radio, and Honeycutt comes in, and Coach Jones says that Radio likes the radio, and Radio sort of repeats the word for the radio, and it may start to stick. And Honeycutt, in an act of kindness, gives Radio a burger and a drink. On the way home, Coach Jones is driving Radio home, and he asks to point out where he lives. Radio turns up the radio, and Coach Jones tries to start a conversation, while Radio sways back and forth to the music. They get home, and Coach Jones helps Radio to take his trolley out of the back of the truck. A woman comes out of the house and looks cautious as Radio comes inside, and she still looks unsure as Coach Jones leaves. This woman is Radio's mother. Her name is Maggie, and she's played by S. Epatha Magnuson. In his home, Radio is taking out his radio, which is in pieces. Maggie says that he should go and get washed up for dinner, and she's made him his favourite food. She's a very kind mother, and it's probably the best part of the movie. In the field, Coach Jones is talking to his team, and he says that Radio is going to be helping them out, and tells them that they should not have a problem with that. A montage then plays with Radio helping out, messing around, and there are some comedic moments as the team train. At a game, Radio throws a ball, but it goes the wrong way, and he even gets a couple of pom-poms and joins them with the cheerleading team. And this is a particular issue when portraying people with learning or developmental disabilities. They are often the butt of the joke. Because Radio doesn't behave in the same way that non-disabled people do, his behaviour is often open to laughs. This is particularly highlighted in this scene because of a montage of what he does wrong. Things like just throwing the ball in the wrong direction and joining in with the cheerleading team only serve to infantilise him and make fun of his character. Although being set in the 70s, where James Robert Kennedy's real-life story at the high school began in the 60s, there could be something said for a lack of knowledge about learning disabilities. However, through an early 2000s lens, there could have been an opportunity to flesh out Radio's disability and ground him as a person. Instead, the film opts for cheap laughs. There's a montage between games of training, and throughout the games it seems that Radio is becoming more popular, becoming a mascot for the team. At the barber's, a man jokes that the team are doing more to socialise to win than they are to win games, because they're losing. And this man's name is Frank, and he's played by Chris Mulkey. At Radio's home, he's dropped off by Coach Jones, and he goes to talk to Maggie. Coach Jones says he wants to take Radio out of town for a match, and Maggie says that she's worried considering how they've treated Radio so far. She talks about how Radio is slower than most, and she's the only thing that he has since his dad died a few years ago. She says she thinks people are just waiting for an excuse to take him away from her. And this is an issue that is raised by the film but is never really explored. This might go into the realms of the able saviour, but it seems that Maggie had nowhere else to turn, and Coach Jones may have been given her a lifeline. When compared to now, being a single mother in the 70s was massively stigmatised, especially if she was to have a child with a learning disability. In America back then, parents would have to beg local schools to take their child, and although now they are guaranteed a place, the quality of education and care that they would get still varies. Children were often mislabelled as lazy or emotionally disturbed due to a lack of knowledge back then, and today, even though we are more aware of certain neurodiversity, it may still take years to get a proper diagnosis. So being a film made in the early 2000s, it could have been that as a society we were aware of the injustice, but just not in the position to do anything about it just yet. Her school principal Daniels is complaining about what can happen to Radio if they go out of town with him, and she's concerned. And this is a problem where the film says how sad it was that Radio was excluded, but it also frames it in a way that perhaps the principal had a point. Although exclusion is never truly the answer, Radio's inclusion is seen as a risk. The risk being that his behaviour might put some people off, or to subject him to bullying and or laughter. An unusual thing to be worried about is at this point of the film, because Radio has been subjected to both and lived to tell the tale. Another reason may be that he won't have the proper resources to look after Radio, such as accommodation and a carer. In this case, the principal should have looked for a place for Radio to stay, and perhaps even trusted that Coach Jones was capable of keeping an eye on him. Radio is also never consulted himself. Because of his learning disability, it feels like the staff are making decisions for him rather than asking him what he's capable of doing. They make him into a child because they don't understand his learning disability. They are doing it in the guise of what's best for Radio, but in reality, all they're doing is ensuring that they don't have to deal with him themselves. This not only infantilises him, but treats him like an object that can be passed around from place to place. Outside, Coach Jones tells Radio that he can't go with them because of the concerns that other people have, and he leaves Radio to watch as the school bus goes away. Radio calms his nerves as he listens to his radio and waves them off. Then a montage plays of Radio practicing football at night in the rain by himself as his radio is playing. He goes to kick a football but stumbles and misses the goal. The next day, Radio is having lunch with Coach Jones. He tells Radio the football season is nearly over and asks him if he's going to be okay with that. But Coach Jones has an idea of how to make it up to him. Cut to the next game and Radio's there and he stands with Coach Jones and gets excited as he calls out a play and the team go through with it. But the other team have heard what he said and Coach Jones says that he can't let the other team know what they're going to do. Coach Jones then gets into an argument with the ref and Radio repeats the insult, calling him a chicken shit. After the game, Radio gives the ball to Johnny, who had been having trouble keeping hold of the ball in the first place. It was an act of kindness on Radio's part, but the rest of them laugh. At a game, Coach Jones tells Radio he has a good feeling about this, and the team scores a touchdown. After the match, Coach Jones congratulates the team and gives Radio the game ball as he thinks Radio is good for the team. On the way home, Coach Jones and Linda are talking. She gives him a kiss and Coach Jones goes back to the barber's. He says to the men in there that he's proud of the team, but Frank says that Radio is a distraction that the team doesn't need. Coach Jones disagrees and he leaves. He goes out to see Honeycutt and he tells him that he thinks that Radio is a problem for the team as well. But Coach Jones suggests that Radio should go with the basketball team instead. At home, Radio is upset, holding his football as he sits on the bed. His mum comforts him, telling him how proud she is of him, and she asks him for a hug. And again, a nice moment in an otherwise woefully misrepresentative film of a person with a learning disability. At home, Principal Daniels is talking to Coach Jones, and she isn't sure about Radio being at school because she thinks he'll be a distraction. She insists, though, that Radio stay with Coach Jones at all times while he was in the school. And Coach Jones is then sitting with Radio and teaching him how to spell radio, because that is how they know him. And again, it seems that even at this point, nobody's bothered to ask him or his mother what his real name is. In a classroom, Coach Jones is called away and leaves Radio in charge. But as soon as he leaves, the whole class start talking. In an office, a man is there to talk about Radio and to assess his ability. This man uses the R word, unconvinced that Radio will do well. And although this was a more common word to describe a person with an intellectual disability, it doesn't sit well and it makes him not a nice person. This character's name is Tucker, which is a good rhyming situation, and he's played by Patrick Breen. At the gym, Coach Jones is talking to Honeycutt about Radio as they watch him playing basketball with the team, and talking about how much he's improved and how much better he's feeling at school. Radio calls Coach Jones and Linda picks up. She calls up to her husband, but he doesn't reply, so she asks if she can help. Radio says that he's trying to get ready for something, but he doesn't know what clothes to wear. And he takes out the clothes and is shouting through the phone to ask which ones are better. They can't see what he's doing, and he thinks that they can help him anyway. It's another, again, comedic moment for somebody who doesn't understand. Outside, some carol singers are singing, and everyone's at a Christmas event. Radio looks at himself in a Christmas bauble, and Coach Jones gets back into his car. The whole thing with the bauble is, again, it's another comedic thing. It's making a figure of fun out of the character, and I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me. Mary Ellen then comes to the car, and she says how nice it is that Coach has been looking out for Radio. He says that they haven't had much chance to talk, but Mary Helen says that he hasn't really taken any of those chances. There have been plenty. Radio then arrives and Mary Helen leaves, and Coach Jones says he'll see her at home. At Radio's home, Coach Jones gives him a present, and it's a radio, a brand new one. Radio picks it up and turns it on, dancing to the music and encouraging his mum and Coach to dance with, and they do so awkwardly as Radio thanks Coach Jones. As Radio goes gone to bed, Coach Jones and Maggie talk about him and how hard she works, and she asks why he's spending so much time with Radio, and Coach Jones just says it's the right thing to do. And we come to the point that I think is the biggest problem in the way that the film is framed. Coach Jones sees his role in Radio's life as a way to make amends for his ignorant behaviour when he was a child, and so including Radio at school makes him Radio's saviour. However, this takes away any of Radio's agency and treats him like an object, a figure of pity that needs to be saved. He makes a biopic of James Robert Kennedy all about Coach Jones instead, and puts him on a pedestal, as the audience are meant to admire him for taking in an underprivileged boy. In real life, Coach Jones and Radio became lifelong friends and got to know each other. But in the film, it's suggested that Coach Jones only does what he does because he has a feeling of guilt and duty. At home, Coach Jones looks at a picture of Mary Helen when she was small on a decoration, and he goes in to see her sleeping on the couch, and he puts a blanket over. At Radio's home, he's pulling his trolley along and a police car turns up. He asks Radio where he got the new radio from, and he says it was a present. The policeman doesn't believe him though. He gets out of the car and starts touching Radio's things, and one thing leads to another, and he gets arrested. At the station, other cops are watching a basketball game as the cop brings in Radio, locking him in a cell. But the other cops aren't paying attention, so they don't know what's going on. The cop said he doesn't know who Radio is because he's new in the town. But then Radio is then, in the next scene watching TV with the other cops as they explain the situation and that Radio is harmless, as he always has been. Coach Jones then arrives to take him home. But on the way home, the cop who arrested him gives Radio a ride and helps him to deliver presents to the team. And then he takes him back home. Coach Jones is waiting for him and says that Maggie isn't back yet, and says that he's proud of him and he's sure that Radio did the right thing and didn't do anything wrong. At school, Radio is happily talking to the other students, A basketball game starts and Coach Jones is on the side, excitedly shouting at the team. A school radio is happily talking to the other students. A basketball game starts and Coach Jones is on the side and radio's excitedly shouting at the team, and Honeycutt tells them to sit down. At the school office, a woman asks Radio for a hug, and he gets on the comm system and starts talking about what's for lunch. This seems to be a sort of regular thing that they get him to do, and the students laugh while he's talking. Then later on, Johnny tells Radio that he needs to go to the women's locker room, and as Radio goes in, they all scream and he runs out the room as the team members laugh at him. It seems that this kind of ableism and seeing Radio as a figure of fun hasn't stopped. Outside, Coach Jones asks why Radio went into the locker room, but Radio won't say who told him to go in there. Coach Jones commends him on his loyalty, and Radio adjusts Coach Jones's collar as he sits down. So it's like Radio understands that he shouldn't squeal on people, but also he doesn't quite fully understand the full situation. Coach Jones then goes to see Johnny because he assumes that he's the one that played the prank on Radio and he reads him the right act. Principal Daniels then comes to see what's going on, and she agrees that Johnny shouldn't play because of what he did to Radio. In the office, Principal Daniels gets off the phone with a parent who's concerned about Radio. She tells Coach Jones that he's too close to him and that Radio could do something worse next. At home, Mary Helen comes off the phone and tells Coach Jones that Radio's mother's died, but she's also in tears and crying quite a bit. And then, although we don't really see her with Radio, we don't see her with Radio's mother, so I don't really understand this reaction. And that's because I don't think it comes across in the way that it was intended. Because although Sarah Drew gives a good performance, it doesn't really work in the narrative of the film. There's supposed to be a story where Coach Jones is substituting his relationship for his daughter with Radio. However, Mary Helen barely mentioned this, and it could have been put across much more strongly. Add to that the fact that Mary Helen is barely seen interacting with Radio or his mother at all, and her response doesn't really make sense. So when Mary Helen cries when she finds out that Radio's mother has died, it comes across as false. It appears that Mary Helen is crying because she thinks that Radio will be so lost without his mother, which may be true, but surely that kind of sympathy would come from spending a lot of time with somebody and understanding their relationship. Instead, dare I say, it comes across as a non-disabled person crying because the disabled person has suffered some kind of hardship. Whereas Radio would indeed be inconsolable when his mother dies, anybody else would really. And her emotional outburst comes across as a non-disabled person thinking that a disabled person's life is bad enough because they're disabled, without the loss of a loved one on top of that. Coach Jones then goes to Radio's house and he's met by police officers. He goes inside to find Radio crying. Mary Helen comes in too, and Coach Jones sits with Radio. He comforts him and Mary Helen cries as she watches. When they get home, Coach Jones tells Mary Helen a story about when he heard a noise while he was delivering papers when he was 12, and he realised it was a boy about his age. He said the boy had been kept behind a chicken wire, and he realised that he may have had a learning disability like Radio. And the little boy would throw a ball to him, but Coach Jones would never stop and play with him. At school, Principal Daniels and Coach Jones are talking, and she says that Tucker is back to talk about Radio. In an office, Tucker asked Coach Jones about how Radio is being monitored, and about his behaviour with his arrest and the locker room incident. Coach Jones gets angry about how Radio's story has been twisted, and he leaves. In another office, Coach Jones is talking to Frank, and Coach Jones accuses him of making things up about Radio. Frank denies it, saying that Radio does his own thing, and Coach Jones suggests that he just wants to be the one to run Radio out of town. In a classroom, Coach Jones is helping Radio to write the word radio. Again, not his real name, and nobody's bothered to ask. In a locker room, Johnny sees a note from Radio by his locker with a radio next to it. He goes over to talk to Radio and they make up. At a game, Radio is with Honeycutt and he's watching excitedly, and Coach Jones goes to see Principal Daniels and sees her talking to Frank, and he thinks that they're talking about Radio behind his back, and he says he's not going to let Frank make the rules about what Radio does. After the game, they're in the locker room and celebrating. Everybody's going home, and it turns out that Frank is Johnny's father. But Johnny's changed his mind about radio, and he tells his father that he should do the same thing. At home, Coach Jones and Linda are talking about radio, and the coach explains how radio's life could change because of bureaucracy. Linda assures him that they've been good for each other. At a church, Coach Jones talks to Radio about graduating, and Radio puts his radio to his ear to comfort himself. And Coach Jones says that the change is okay. They get in Coach Jones's truck as the music plays. At the barber shop, the town are having a meeting. The principal's there, and Frank says that radio is a disruption to the whole town. And then Coach Jones comes in, and Principal Daniels says that she was going to call him. But then the coach starts talking about radio and about his own coach when he was a kid, who told him to make his own decisions. He says how much he loves football, and he says that nobody's really thinking about radio and what he likes to do. And I mean, nobody is, because they're all talking about radio behind his back and not talking to him about his decisions at all. But anyway. He then says radio teaches them about how to treat people where they thought that they should be teaching him. He then says that he's decided to step down from his coaching position, but wants to keep teaching to keep an eye on radio and spend more time with his family. At a graduation ceremony 3 months later, Radio is being helped with his gown and his mortarboard, and Johnny comes to say hello and gives him a varsity basketball jacket. Principal Daniels says that it was an honorary graduation, and Principal Daniels finally says his full, real name, which is James Robert Kennedy. The students cheer, and the voiceover says that Radio is in his 50s now, or he was at the time that the film came out, and he says that Coach Jones was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and is still friends with Radio. And then, over the credits, real footage of James Robert Kennedy is playing, with him talking to the team, and really getting involved with what they do. Okay, so that's the film, and up next I'm going to be talking a bit more about what I think about the film overall, and what I think it means for a non-disabled audience. Radio is one of the worst kind of Oscar bait movies, which uses a disabled person, a real person at that, to pull the heartstrings of the audience. It's just unfortunate that where other films such as this could have worked, Radio does not. Cuba Gooding Jr.'s performance is the laziest cliche of a person with a learning disability, and his character, put front and centre, only highlights how badly considered it was. Along with the way the character is either a source of inspiration for other characters or a figure of fun, Radio should have been portrayed in a much more beloved way than he is. Although not intentionally done, what with it being set in the 70s, Radio also highlights several levels of ableism in its own story, much of which may go right over the heads of the non-disabled audience. Firstly, nobody ever learns his name, despite time passing and multiple opportunities throughout the film. When Radio is talked about, he is never in the room when decisions are made about him, and although his disability may mean that he may not fully understood the ramifications of what was being asked, it would have been better if he was included just once. If the perspective was brought up at all, then it may have made the audience think about his treatment and even just addressed in terms of disability in general. Even then, Radio may have garnered more awards than it did, if it didn't try to manipulate the audience so much. That's because the life of James Robert Kennedy is told over the course of one football season, whereas in fact the events, starting from when he was brought in by the coach, span over 50 years. This unfortunately means that Radio gets arrested, loses his mother, and graduates, albeit honorarily, in record time, causing the audience to feel emotional whiplash. Okay, so up next I thought I'd talk about the trivia. Okay, so of the trivia, I can tell you firstly that James Robert Radio Kennedy was born in Anderson, South Carolina on October 14th, 1946, and he died in Anderson on December 14th, 2019. On September 2nd, 2016, James Robert Radio Kennedy was inducted in the T.L. Hanna Hall of Fame. And because the relationship between radio and the town was ongoing while the film was being made, the screenwriter chose to compress the highlights into a 1-year period, for better or worse. During filming in Walterboro, South Carolina, Cuba Gooding Jr. formed a friendship with a local store owner named Leon. According to crew members, Cuba would take breaks from filming to visit Leon's small convenience store, chat with him about life and the community. Leon even had a small role as an extra, playing a customer in a scene filmed at his own store. Most of the fans in the stand during the game were students and fans from Goose Creek High School, a school about 45 minutes from Walterboro that uses the same colours as T.L. Hanna. Goose Creek and Hanna met in 2008 state playoffs, allowing many of the extras in the movie to meet the real Radio. Radio is also Deborah Willinger's first feature film appearance in 9 years. Anderson, South Carolina is the northwest part of the state, with a population of 27,000 people. The film cast includes 2 Oscar winners, Cuba Gooding Jr. and Ringo Starr, and 3 Oscar nominees, Ed Harris, Alfred Woodard, and Deborah Winger. In 1976, the year the movie takes place, Harold Jones was the junior varsity football coach, not the varsity head coach. He would not become the varsity head coach until 1985, and the varsity head coach at the time was Jim Fraser. Though the events in the movie take place in the upstate region of South Carolina near the mountains, the football stadium in the movie is in Walterboro, in South Carolina's low country near the coast. According to IMDb, the film cast includes 2 Oscar winners, Cuba Gooding Jr. and Ringo Starr, and 3 Oscar nominees, Ed Harris, Alfred Woodard, and Deborah Winger. If you think you didn't see Ringo Starr, it's because apparently he played the mascot for the team. And I'm not sure if I could positively confirm or deny any of that, because it could be true, but it might not be true. You didn't hear it from me. And finally, Cuba Gooding Jr. was nominated for Worst Actor at the Razzies that year, but he lost out to Ben Affleck in Daredevil. So the early 2000s really had some interesting disability representation. Okay, that's it for this week. Next week we're talking about Marvellous, the biopic of a man called Neil Baldwin, who is a man with learning disability who was taken in by Stoke City's football manager and became a household name. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so via Bluesky at bluesky.com/film-ability. You can also email me at film-ability@outlook.com. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the things that I do here, you can find me at Patreon at patreon.com/film-ability. You can also find my book at Amazon on Kindle and paperback called Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.